Imagine walking slowly toward a large body of water, an ocean, a river, or even a quiet lake. You haven't stepped into it. You haven't touched it. You're simply standing nearby. And yet, something already feels different. The air feels slightly cooler, or sometimes heavier. Your breathing changes just a little, almost too subtle to notice unless you pay close attention. Your attention itself begins to shift. In some cases, it becomes calmer. In others, it becomes more alert. There's a quiet adjustment happening inside you, even though nothing obvious has occurred. At first glance, it might seem like nothing meaningful is happening. After all, you haven't interacted with the water in any direct way. But this assumption depends on a misunderstanding that your body only reacts when you physically touch something. In reality, your body is constantly responding to the environment, even at a distance. Your senses are not passive. They are always active, always collecting information. The moment you step closer to water, the environment around you changes, and your body begins to respond to those changes immediately. This response is not dramatic or sudden, but it is real and measurable. The first thing to understand is that water does not exist in isolation. It influences the air around it. The temperature near water often behaves differently compared to areas farther away. The presence of moisture changes how heat is transferred through the air. Even slight increases in humidity can alter how your body regulates its temperature. Your skin is constantly sensing these changes. It detects moisture in the air, even if you are not aware of it consciously. When humidity rises, the evaporation of sweat from your skin slows down. This affects how efficiently your body cools itself. So, without any deliberate action on your part, your body begins to adjust its internal processes. At the same time, your lungs are interacting with this slightly different air. The air near water can feel denser or fresher, depending on the conditions. Each breath carries subtle differences in temperature and moisture. Your respiratory system responds automatically, adjusting the rhythm and depth of breathing in small ways. But the changes are not limited to temperature and air. Your sensory systems are also becoming more engaged. Even before you consciously focus on it, your eyes begin to pick up movement. Water is rarely perfectly still. There are always small ripples, shifts in light, reflections that change from moment to moment. Your brain is highly sensitive to motion because motion signals change, and change is information. From an evolutionary perspective, detecting movement was essential for survival. So when your visual system encounters the constantly shifting patterns of water, it becomes more active, even if you are not directly paying attention. This increased activity does not necessarily feel like effort. Instead, it often manifests as a subtle shift in awareness. You may feel more present or simply more aware of your surroundings without knowing exactly why. All of this begins within seconds. You have not touched the water. You have not made a conscious decision to react. Yet your body has already started adjusting to a new set of environmental conditions. And this reveals something important. Your experience of the world does not begin with deliberate action. It begins with continuous interaction. Your body is always responding, always adapting, even in moments that seem still or uneventful. As you remain near the water, the most immediate influence continues to come not from the water itself, but from the air it shapes. Water quietly alters its surroundings, and your body is constantly reading those changes, even when you are not consciously aware of them. Air near water carries more moisture. This might seem like a small detail, but for your body, it changes how heat moves. Normally, when your body warms up, it releases heat partly through the evaporation of sweat. That evaporation pulls heat away from your skin, helping to cool you. But when the air is already humid, evaporation slows down. The air cannot absorb as much moisture, so your cooling system becomes slightly less efficient. Your body notices this immediately, not through thought, but through sensors in your skin and nervous system. It begins to adjust how it regulates temperature. Blood flow near the skin can shift slightly, and your body may reduce or redistribute sweating depending on the conditions. These are small adjustments, but they happen quickly, often within seconds of entering a more humid environment. At the same time, the temperature near water behaves differently than in dry areas. Water absorbs and releases heat more slowly than land. This creates a buffering effect. The air near water tends to change temperature more gradually. Depending on the situation, it may feel cooler during the day or slightly warmer at night. When you step into this environment, your body begins to recalibrate its expectations about temperature. Your breathing is also affected. Each breath you take carries not just oxygen, but also moisture and tiny particles from the surrounding air. Near moving water, especially waves or flowing streams, microscopic droplets can become suspended in the air. Along with these, there can be small electrically charged particles. We can detect and measure these particles using instruments, so their presence is not in question. What remains less clear is how strongly they influence your body. Some studies suggest these particles may have subtle effects on alertness or mood. Others find little to no consistent impact. This places us in a familiar scientific position. We can describe the physical environment in detail, but connecting those measurements to subjective experience is much more difficult. This gap highlights an important limitation. Knowing that the air contains certain particles does not automatically explain how you feel. Your experience is not a direct reading of individual variables like humidity, temperature, or particle count. It is the result of many signals being processed together. Even the simple act of breathing becomes part of this process. Slight changes in air density, moisture, and temperature can alter how comfortable or noticeable each breath feels. Your respiratory system adjusts without your awareness, maintaining balance while the external conditions shift. What is striking is how quickly all of this begins. You do not need prolonged exposure. Within moments of standing near water, your body has already started adjusting multiple systems at once: temperature regulation, skin response, and breathing patterns. Yet, from your perspective, it often feels like nothing specific is happening. There is no clear signal that says, your body has now changed. Instead, there may be only a vague sense that the environment feels different. This reveals something subtle about how your body works. It does not wait for large, obvious changes. It responds continuously to small variations, maintaining stability in a world that is always shifting. And when you step near water, even before any direct contact, that process is already underway. As these physical adjustments continue, another layer of response begins to unfold, one that involves your sensory systems in a deeper way. Your body is not only regulating temperature and breathing, it is also actively interpreting patterns in the environment. And near water, those patterns are unusually rich. Your visual system is one of the first to engage. Water is almost never completely still. Even in a calm lake, there are tiny ripples, subtle reflections, and shifting light patterns. In an ocean or river, the movement becomes more obvious, waves rising and falling, surfaces constantly changing shape. Your eyes detect all of this automatically. The important point is not just that there is movement, but that the movement is continuous and varied. Your brain is highly sensitive to change. Static scenes require very little processing, but dynamic scenes, where things are constantly shifting, activate deeper levels of visual analysis. Your brain begins tracking motion, identifying patterns, and predicting how those patterns will evolve. This happens without conscious effort. You are not deliberately analyzing each wave or ripple, but your visual system is still working in the background. It is detecting edges, contrasts, and motion, building a real-time model of what you are seeing. The constant variation in water keeps this system engaged. At the same time, your auditory system is receiving a unique kind of input. The sound of water is not random noise. It has structure. Waves, for example, follow a rhythm. They rise, break, and recede in cycles. But these cycles are not perfectly regular. Each wave is slightly different in timing, intensity, and shape. This creates a pattern that sits between order and randomness. Your brain is particularly responsive to this kind of signal. If a sound is too predictable, your brain quickly learns it and begins to ignore it. If it is completely random, it can become overwhelming or stressful. But sounds that are partially predictable, structured, but not repetitive, keep the brain engaged without overloading it. Water produces exactly this kind of sound. Your auditory system begins to track it, not by focusing on individual waves, but by recognizing the overall pattern. This creates a steady stream of sensory input that is both stable and constantly changing. Now consider how these two systems, vision and hearing, interact. They are not operating independently. Your brain combines them. The movement you see and the sound you hear reinforce each other. When a wave rises, you see it. When it breaks, you hear it. These signals arrive together, creating a unified perception of motion and sound. This integration is important because it allows your brain to build a more complete model of the environment. It does not just know that something is moving, it understands how that movement unfolds over time. This improves prediction, allowing your brain to anticipate what will happen next, even in a system as variable as water. There is also another layer of sensory input that is less obvious but still significant. Your sense of space and balance, often called the vestibular system, can be subtly influenced by the visual patterns of water. Large moving surfaces, shifting horizons, and reflections can alter your perception of stability and depth. Your brain continuously adjusts to maintain balance and orientation. All of this happens within seconds of being near water. Your sensory systems become more active, more engaged, and more interconnected. They are not simply receiving information, they are building a dynamic, constantly updated model of the environment. Yet, from your point of view, this complex activity often feels simple. You may just experience a sense of calm or focus or quiet awareness. The underlying processes, the motion tracking, pattern recognition, sensory integration, remain hidden. This reveals something important about perception. What you experience is not a direct reflection of the raw data your senses receive. It is the result of that data being processed, combined, and simplified into something usable. Near water, this process becomes especially rich because the environment provides continuous, structured variation for your brain to interpret. As all of these signals continue to arrive, changes in air, movement in your visual field, patterns in sound, your brain faces a complex task. It must take many separate streams of information and turn them into a single, coherent experience. This process happens so smoothly that you rarely notice it, but it is one of the most difficult problems in understanding the mind. You do not experience humidity, temperature, motion, and sound as separate variables. You experience something unified. It might feel like calmness or focus or a quiet sense of presence, but that feeling is not located in any one signal. It is the result of many signals being combined. This combination is not a simple addition, it is a transformation. Your brain takes raw sensory input and reorganizes it into patterns that are meaningful for you. It filters out what is not immediately useful, highlights what might matter, and compresses everything into a manageable form. Without this process, the sheer amount of information would be overwhelming. To understand how remarkable this is, imagine trying to consciously track every detail, the exact temperature of the air, the precise humidity level, the angle of each wave, the timing of each sound. It would be impossible. Instead, your brain creates a summary. It turns complexity into something simple enough to experience directly, near water. This process becomes especially interesting because the signals are continuous and changing. The brain cannot rely on a fixed pattern. It has to constantly update its interpretation. Each new wave, each shift in light, each variation in sound slightly modifies the internal model your brain is building. This creates a dynamic state. Your experience is not static. It is continuously refreshed moment by moment. You are not just perceiving the environment, you are tracking its changes in real time. At the same time, your brain is not only processing what is happening now, it is also predicting what will happen next. Prediction is a central part of how perception works. The brain uses past patterns to anticipate future events. When predictions match reality, the system feels stable. When they don't, adjustments are made. Water presents a unique challenge for this system. It is structured enough to allow prediction, but variable enough to prevent certainty. Waves follow general patterns, but each one is slightly different. Reflections shift depending on light and movement. Sounds repeat, but never exactly the same way. Because of this, your brain remains engaged. It cannot fully relax into a completely predictable pattern, but it is also not overwhelmed by randomness. It operates in a balanced state, continuously updating its expectations without being forced into constant correction. This balance may be one reason why many people report a particular kind of mental state near water. It is not simply relaxation or alertness, but a mixture of both. The brain is active but not strained. It is attentive but not overloaded. However, this is where our understanding becomes limited. We can describe the processes, sensory integration, pattern recognition, prediction, but we do not fully understand how they produce a specific subjective feeling. Why does this combination of signals feel calm to one person and neutral or even unsettling to another? Part of the answer likely involves past experience, memory, and individual differences in the nervous system. But even with these factors, there is still a gap between the physical description and the lived experience. This gap is important. It shows that while we can analyze the components of perception, the way they come together into a single, unified experience is not fully explained. The brain is not just a passive receiver of information, it is an active system, constantly constructing a version of reality based on the signals it receives. Near water, this construction process becomes especially visible, not because you can see it directly, but because the environment provides a rich and constantly changing set of inputs. Your brain responds by building an experience that feels simple, even though it is based on a highly complex and continuous interaction of signals. As this integrated experience continues to form, another process is quietly unfolding beneath it. Your brain is not only combining sensory signals, it is actively trying to predict what will happen next. This predictive process is constant. It does not turn on and off. It runs continuously, shaping how you experience every moment. The brain does not wait for events to happen and then react. Instead, it builds expectations in advance. Based on patterns it has seen before, it generates a model of what is likely to occur in the immediate future. This allows you to move through the world efficiently without needing to analyze every detail from scratch. Near water, this predictive system becomes particularly active because the environment provides patterns that are both structured and variable. Waves follow a general rhythm. You can anticipate that a wave will rise, break, and recede, but you cannot predict the exact shape, size, or timing of each one. There is always a small element of uncertainty. This combination, predictability mixed with variation, creates a unique situation for the brain. If the environment were completely predictable, your brain would quickly reduce its activity. Once a pattern is fully understood, it requires less attention. On the other hand, if the environment were completely random, the brain would struggle to form reliable predictions, leading to confusion or stress. Water sits between these extremes. It provides enough regularity for the brain to build expectations, but enough variation to keep updating those expectations continuously. As a result, your predictive system remains engaged without becoming overwhelmed. This ongoing adjustment has subtle effects on how you feel. Your brain is constantly comparing its predictions with incoming sensory information. When the predictions are close to reality, the system remains stable. When there is a mismatch, the brain generates a small error signal and adjusts its model. Near water, these prediction errors are usually small and frequent. Each wave is slightly different from what was expected. Each sound varies just enough to require a minor update. This creates a steady flow of small corrections rather than large, disruptive ones. These small corrections keep the brain active in a controlled way. The system is working, but it is not under strain. It is adjusting continuously, but without large shocks or surprises. This may contribute to the sense of balance or steadiness that some people experience in such environments. However, this is where our understanding becomes less precise. We can describe the predictive process and measure certain aspects of it, but linking it directly to subjective experience is difficult. We do not fully understand why this pattern of small, continuous adjustments might feel calming for one person and insignificant for another. Individual differences play a role. Past experiences with water can shape how the brain interprets these signals. If water is associated with safety and familiarity, the predictive system may operate with less tension. If it is associated with danger or uncertainty, the same patterns may produce a different response. There are also deeper systems involved, such as those related to balance and spatial orientation. Large bodies of water often create open visual fields and shifting horizons. These can influence how your brain maintains a sense of position and stability. The predictive system must account not only for the movement of water, but also for your own position within that environment. All of this happens simultaneously. Your brain is predicting patterns in motion, sound, and space, updating its model in real time. You are not aware of these calculations. What you experience is the result, a single, continuous sense of being in that environment. This highlights an important point. Your experience is not simply a reaction to what is happening. It is shaped by what your brain expects to happen. Near water, the balance between expectation and variation creates a state where the mind remains engaged, adjusting constantly, but without being pushed into instability. As this predictive process continues, something broader begins to emerge. Your body is no longer just reacting to individual signals or even combining them into a single experience. It is maintaining a continuous relationship with the environment, one that updates moment by moment. This relationship depends on stability. Your brain must keep your internal state within workable limits while the external world keeps changing. Temperature shifts, air composition varies, visual patterns move, sounds fluctuate. Yet despite all of this, you do not feel overwhelmed. You feel stable, oriented, and able to function. This stability is not automatic. It is actively maintained. Inside your body, multiple systems are working together to keep conditions within a narrow range. Your temperature regulation adjusts to humidity and airflow. Your breathing adapts to subtle changes in air density and moisture. Your sensory systems continuously recalibrate as visual and auditory input evolves. All of these adjustments are coordinated without conscious control. This process is often described as balance, but it is not a static balance. It is dynamic. The body is constantly correcting itself, making small changes to stay within a stable range. Near water, this dynamic balancing becomes more noticeable at a physical level, even if you do not consciously recognize it. For example, consider your sense of orientation. Large bodies of water often create wide, open visual fields. The horizon becomes more prominent. At the same time, reflections and moving surfaces can distort depth perception. Your brain must interpret these signals carefully to maintain a sense of position. This involves the coordination of multiple systems: vision, inner ear balance mechanisms, and proprioception, the sense of where your body is in space. These systems compare information and resolve differences. If the visual field suggests movement, but your body is still, the brain must decide how to interpret that mismatch. Near water, small mismatches like this can occur frequently. The surface moves, the light shifts, reflections change. Your brain adjusts continuously to maintain a stable sense of reality. These adjustments are usually so smooth that you do not notice them, but they are essential. There is also a broader regulatory system involved, one that manages overall physiological state. Your heart rate, breathing rhythm, and level of alertness are all influenced by the environment. Subtle changes in sensory input can shift these systems slightly, increasing or decreasing activation. What is interesting is that these changes are not always consistent. The same environment can produce slightly different responses depending on internal conditions. If you are already tense, the additional sensory input may increase alertness. If you are relaxed, it may support a more stable, steady state. This variability shows that your body is not simply reacting to the environment in a fixed way. It is integrating external signals with internal conditions. The result is a combined state that reflects both the environment and your current physiology. We understand many parts of this process. We can measure heart rate changes, breathing patterns, and sensory activity. But we do not fully understand how all these systems coordinate so effectively. The body maintains stability across multiple dimensions at once, and the exact mechanisms that allow this coordination are still being studied. Another important point is that this regulation happens continuously Not just when something changes dramatically. Even when you feel still, your body is active, constantly adjusting to maintain balance. Near water, the environment provides a steady stream of subtle variations which keeps this regulatory system engaged. So within seconds of being near water, your body has entered a state of ongoing adjustment. It is not reacting once and stopping. It is continuously interacting with the environment, updating itself in real time. From your perspective, this may feel simple, a sense that the environment is different or that you feel slightly changed. But underneath that simplicity is a complex system maintaining stability while adapting to constant variation. This reveals something fundamental. Your body is not a fixed system placed in the world. It is a dynamic system, continuously shaped by the conditions around it. Even in the most ordinary moments, as this continuous interaction unfolds, something even more subtle begins to take shape. Your body is not just maintaining stability and adjusting to signals. It is also shaping your sense of reality itself, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but quietly through the way it filters and organizes everything it receives. Up to this point, it might seem like a one-way process. The environment changes, your body reacts, and your brain interprets the result. But the process is more circular than that. Your brain does not simply receive information, it selects, emphasizes, and even predicts what matters. In doing so, it actively shapes the experience you have. Near water, this becomes especially noticeable because the environment is rich in variation, but low in clear, fixed structure. There are no sharp edges defining space in the way buildings or walls do. Instead, there are gradients, shifting light, moving surfaces, changing sounds. Your brain has to work differently here. It cannot rely on rigid patterns, so it becomes more flexible in how it interprets what is happening. This flexibility changes how attention works. Instead of locking onto a single object or detail, your attention often spreads out. It becomes more diffuse, more open to the overall environment, rather than focused on specific points. You are still aware, but in a broader, less concentrated way. This shift in attention is not something you decide consciously. It emerges from the type of input your brain is receiving. The continuous, flowing patterns of water do not demand sharp focus. They encourage a wider, more distributed form of awareness. Your brain adapts to match the structure of the environment. At the same time, your internal sense of time can begin to change slightly. When the brain processes highly structured, repetitive tasks, time often feels segmented and measurable. But when it processes continuous, non-repeating patterns, time can feel less defined. Moments blend into each other more smoothly. Near water, this can happen because the signals you are receiving do not have clear boundaries. One wave flows into the next. One sound fades into another. There are no distinct markers separating one moment from the next. Your brain processes this as a continuous stream rather than a series of discrete events. As a result, your experience of time can feel softer, less sharply divided. You may not notice this directly, but it influences how you perceive the passage of moments. There is also an interaction between this sensory environment and your internal state. Your thoughts do not occur in isolation from your surroundings. The patterns your brain is processing externally can influence the patterns it generates internally. When the external environment is dynamic but not chaotic, your internal thought patterns may become more fluid as well. This does not mean your thoughts become clearer or more insightful. It simply means their structure may change. Instead of rigid, step-by-step thinking, there may be a more associative, flowing quality. Ideas connect in less direct ways, following patterns that mirror the environment. What remains unclear is exactly how strong this influence is and how consistently occurs across different individuals. Some people may experience noticeable shifts in attention or thought patterns, while others may not. The underlying mechanisms, how external sensory patterns influence internal cognition, are still not fully understood. What we do know is that the brain does not operate independently of its surroundings. It is constantly interacting with them, and this interaction shapes not only what you perceive, but how you think and feel. So within seconds of being near water, your body and brain are not just adjusting physically, they are entering a different mode of interaction with the world. Attention shifts Perception flows differently, and even the sense of time can subtly change. From the outside, nothing dramatic has happened. You are simply standing near water, but internally, the structure of your experience is already different. And that difference is not coming from the water alone. It is coming from the way your system responds to it, reorganizes itself around it, and constructs a version of reality that fits the patterns it is receiving. When you step back and look at the entire process, something deeper begins to appear. All of these changes, temperature adjustment, sensory activation, pattern recognition, prediction, balance, attention, are happening at the same time. They are not separate events. They are part of a single, continuous interaction between your body and the environment. At first, it might seem like water is the cause and your body is the effect. But that way of thinking is too simple. What is actually happening is an exchange. The environment provides signals, and your body responds to those signals. But your response is not passive. It shapes what you experience, which in turn influences how you continue to respond. This creates a loop. The world affects you. You interpret it. That interpretation becomes your experience, and that experience influences what you notice next. Near water, this loop becomes more visible, not because it is stronger, but because the environment is continuously changing in a structured way. There are no sharp boundaries, no fixed patterns that remain constant. Everything is in motion, but not in a chaotic way. This forces your brain to stay engaged, continuously updating its model of what is happening. What is important here is that your brain never has direct access to reality itself. It only has access to signals, light entering your eyes, vibrations reaching your ears, chemical and thermal changes on your skin. From these signals, it constructs a model, something that represents the world well enough for you to function. When you stand near water, that model becomes slightly different. Not because reality itself has changed in a fundamental way, but because the type of signals you are receiving has changed. The structure of those signals, continuous, flowing, partially predictable, leads your brain to build a different kind of representation. And this is where a deeper question emerges. If your experience depends on how your brain constructs reality from signals, then what you feel is not the world itself. It is your brain's best interpretation of it. Water does not contain calmness. It does not contain focus. It does not contain stillness. Those are qualities of your experience. They arise from how your brain processes the interaction between your body and the environment. We can describe many parts of this process in physical terms. We can measure humidity, temperature, sound frequencies, visual patterns. We can track neural activity and observe how different systems respond. But there is still a gap between these measurements and the experience they produce. We do not yet have a complete explanation for how physical signals become subjective experience, how patterns of activity in the brain turn into the feeling of being present or calm or aware. This remains one of the central open questions in science. And yet, even without a complete explanation, we can see the structure of what is happening. Your body is not a separate observer of the world. It is part of the system. It is constantly interacting with its surroundings, shaping and being shaped at the same time. So when you stand near water, within seconds your body has already begun to change, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in a fundamental one. It has adjusted its internal processes, reorganized its sensory activity, updated its predictions, and constructed a new version of reality based on the signals it receives. From your perspective, this may feel simple. You might just notice that something feels different without being able to say exactly why. But underneath that simplicity is a complex interaction that never stops. And that leads to a final realization. What you experience is not the world as it is. It is the result of a continuous negotiation between your body and the environment. Water is just one example. The same process is happening everywhere all the time. But near water, it becomes easier to notice, not because the process changes, but because the signals make the interaction more visible. So the next time you find yourself standing near water, remember this. Nothing obvious may be happening, but everything already has.